is more liberal, more tolerant, more Democrat-leaning than the one before. It's not just because they're young.
For another point of view, it's Hard News with Russell Brown and Wammo on Kiwi.
From publicaddress.net, the Media 7 show, TVNZ 7, Russell Brown. Good morning to you, Russell.
Good morning.
And of course, you've had a little bit of a listen to the Phoenix Foundation CD, haven't you?
I have indeed, yeah. I haven't had much of a chance to delve into it, but the CD did arrive.
It's got a nice cover?
Yes, it has. It's got a cover with a buffalo on it, as one might expect.
Yeah.
I really like some of the T-shirt designs in the competition.
Oh, right.
That the Phoenix Foundation ran.
Were people interpreting that song, or what was...
They were just interpreting the idea of buffalo. And they could be as loose about it as they liked, and some of them were really neat. I have to say, I really like what the Phoenix Foundation are doing online, inviting a bit of creativity back from the audience.
Yeah.
It's actually quite a nice thing to do.
Minchik's doing the same thing, of course, as well.
Yeah, exactly. So, maybe that's the way forward for musical acts.
Yeah, I reckon. Engage the community.
Yep.
Yeah. Let's look at the topic of Media 7 this week, because you've got some great background info up at Public Address about it. We're talking climate and the media, and in particular, Climate Gate.
Yes. And Climate Gate was, of course, the release late last year, just before the Copenhagen Summit, of a whole bunch of emails from the University of East Anglia's Climatic Research Unit, which doesn't sound all that important, but it was, in fact, one of the key centres for research and more particularly measurement of temperature. And they've been doing this for 20 years.
Yeah.
So they were pretty important. And it's interesting to look at what happened in the media after that, because most of the stories that were written about the content of the emails, which were hacked from a server at the university, most of the stories were actually wrong. A lot was made of phrases like something about hide the decline, which were completely taken out of context, and there's now been 2 official reviews and any number of reviews of the material by the scientific press, and that was completely taken out of context. That was nothing to worry about.
Right.
What there was a concern about, and I've been arguing with scientists about this on Public Address, is that the people at the CRU were scientists. They were not well set up to respond to Freedom of Information Act requests, and it appears that they sought to deliberately frustrate those requests.
Yes.
And you have to be sympathetic for them, because they were getting deluged with them thanks to so-called climate skeptics who are organising themselves on the internet. I think the university should have done something, but in the end, you're not allowed, the law applies to everyone, and freedom of information laws, and we have the Official Information Act here, are actually really important. They're an important part of democracy. But on the other hand, The Guardian, which has done more on this story than anyone else by a factor of 4 or 5, came out pretty clearly. It had criticisms of the way the scientists handled some requests, but it was absolutely emphatic that the science was unaffected. And there was also no evidence that the scientists tried to manipulate results or cover up, data that they didn't like.
So why did it gain so much traction worldwide, and particularly in the media?
Because people I think it was waiting for a backlash. And there's a very large constituency of people out there who are convinced that global warming is all a hoax, and it's all a nonsense put up by whoever. I can never quite work out exactly why people would propose something so monstrously inconvenient as climate change. And they thought they had the evidence there. And some of the British newspapers, particularly the Telegraph and the Times, just tilted off the edge and basically declared that the whole anthropogenic global warming was all over. This had completely disproved it, and of course it hadn't at all. But people have started to believe that, and you've seen that in the US in particular, where the likes of Sarah Palin have been touting this as the end of the theory.
Yeah.
And you've seen it in polls there, where the American public's never been that good on subscribing to certain matters of science, such as evolution, and the belief and support for global warming theories has fallen away in the last 6 months.
So, on a local level, did our local media take their cues from overseas sources?
Our local media, I think, did pretty well, but if you still talk to individual journalists, I don't think science is well understood and it's not well reported. There are still people you can talk to who believe it's all overblown and a hoax and that kind of thing. And when you actually look at it and read it, that's not the case.
There's the guy from ACT, of course, the young ACT.
The guy from ACT. What we have seen, actually, is John Boscawen from ACT, who stood up about 4 weeks ago in Parliament and used ACT's entire supply of parliamentary questions to pursue a ridiculous conspiracy theory about our own climate agency, NIWA. And the funny thing about when people do this, oh, look, you altered your measurements. Yeah, it happens all the time. Measurements are corrected. It's part of actually getting a sensible result. And that people like Boscawen think that they're capable of reading that science straight off the page and then stand up in Parliament and declare that there's been a dreadful cover-up over decades. It's just ridiculous.
And I think we've touched on it before, Russell, but of course also there's this need in the media for journalists to find balance, because that's what journalists should be doing. But when they find the balance, sometimes it appears like the opposite view is as equal to the pro view. So
it's a perennial problem, and you see it very much with climate change, because the overwhelming majority of people who work in the field, all the major science academies, pretty much every national and internationally significant expert body in the world has more or less signed up to what the IPCC is saying about climate change, and yet you will get the dissenter given equal time on TV. And it often happens with science stories. And it actually happens with genetic modification as well. Is that you would get, that was a really good example of it, where the media tended to just back out of making any kind of judgment at all and just put up the talking heads model. Oh, look, he says, she says, like that. And they walk away and think their job's done, but it's not, because you're presenting something as having equal weight that simply doesn't.
Or even something that not totally science related, a story about mining on the Great Barrier Island. In the public meeting there, I think there were 5 people who were pro-mining, but the news item gave them as much weight as everyone else. That's it, which is a slightly different
scenario, but it is. There's this, because it makes your stories balance better.
But I don't know, how do you do it as a journalist?
I think you actually have to, and most New Zealand media are pretty good like this, when it's something where the preponderance of science is so clearly and heavily on one side, you actually have to make that clear. There's actually a very good quote that I'm going to use in my script tonight. And you can find this at the Climate Science and the Media post I've made at publicaddress.net. Professor Keith Hunter for the Royal Society just recently in a statement called Science, Climate Change and Integrity. Science has not proved beyond all reasonable doubt that human activities are changing the climate, but it has clearly shown that there are multiple lines of evidence all pointing in the same direction, and that this view is supported by theories that are well-founded in fundamental sciences like physics. So everything is suggesting that, there is a problem, and there is a sound basis for saying so in physics.
But it always leaves room for doubt, though, doesn't it?
And this is actually the whole idea of doubt, is often something that particularly TV interviewers and radio interviewers seem to find difficult to deal with. But you can't absolutely guarantee blah, blah, blah.
Well, nothing is guaranteed in life, right?
Scientists won't do that.
Like, what is guaranteed in life?
Death.
Exactly.
And so you'll never get scientists to say that, because science is a method of inquiry.
All right, sounds like a great discussion. The recording of that is this afternoon, and it'll be on Media 7 on TVNZ7 tomorrow evening.
It will indeed.
Thanks, Russell.
Bravo.
Cheers. And, of course, publicaddress.net is the website to head to as well. Here's a track from Mini Snap. This era is called Innocence, 10 away from 9. Up after 9 o'clock. We'll be talking to the geeks, part 2 of our nanotechnology series.